finish up this week, and then Brent's back with us next week. He's going to begin a study, which I don't know what you're going to do yet. You don't know either. Okay. There you go. So we do look forward to that, and I'll thank you personally for giving me a break. It's always nice to transition and get to sit as a spectator. Yep, the 2-year break.
I think we've been going about 6 months.
Yeah. It's what we're aiming for anyway. I don't know how successful we are at that, but it's kind of what we're shooting for. So I've been talking the last few weeks about the shift in church culture and how church attendance is kind of plummeting, not just in smaller churches, but in the mega churches too. There are a lot of studies out. Tom Rainer with Church Answers does a lot of statistics and a lot of research, and I think he has a pretty good finger on the pulse of where the church is in the United States. So there are definitely some trends that are worth listening to and paying attention to, and we looked at some of those over the last few weeks and talked about how the grit is what's going to win the day for churches. And so the churches that roll up their sleeves, they do the dirty work, they get into the messy lives of people, and they just stick it out to the end. That's what people are looking for. I think the days of flashy worship services, they're losing their appeal a lot quicker than they ever were before. I think because people are kind of tired of the glamour and all the bells and whistles. And there are a lot of studies that show that younger people are not really into technology. And so it's interesting because people in my generation, people who I went to graduate school with, they're really trying to appeal to younger people by using something like 60% of their sermon time. They're trying to use technology, specifically videos. And they're trying to appeal to that younger generation. And that's interesting to me because that's not what the research is saying. The research is saying that the younger generation is actually fed up with screen time. And they're fed up with video bombardment. And they're actually looking for a retreat. They're looking to get away from that and to just experience God in worship. So I thought that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting trend. People are really migrating towards small groups and house churches specifically. That's gaining a lot of appeal for people. I think that's a positive thing. I think that's a good trend. Also, there's a shift towards lay ministers. The people who are not professional seminary-trained ministers. People are looking, I don't know that they're looking for non-seminary trained ministers. I think people are just stepping up to the plate and doing it. There's a massive shortage of people going into ministry. Bible majors are few and far between. Seminaries are losing people at record pace. So I think it's out of necessity more than anything. People just see this need and they see the needs within their community and they say, well, yeah, this church might want to close their doors, but we're not going to turn our backs on God. And so they just step up to the plate and they do the hard work, and whatever that looks like, they kind of grind away and they do it. So this is a blog post that's been published since last week, whenever we've been talking about all these things. I thought this was really fascinating. Tom Rainer wrote the article. And it's called Comparing Your Church's Current Data to 2019, so pre-pandemic. I'm just going to read the whole article because it's pretty short. He said, there is always a danger in basing an article on numbers. They can seem to be ultimate or, I don't know how you say that because I'm so tired. I'm not even going to try. I'm so tired today. Anyway. They should be neither. Numbers, however, like a thermometer, can be a rough gauge of our current health. In that regard, looking at churches' data can be a good exercise. Though the data is not determinative, it can be an indicator of health or the lack of health. The largest group of data we have is from the SBC. They use certain instruments called the ACP. While that denomination may or may not be a good representation of your affiliation, it can at least give you a rough idea of national averages as a point of comparison. So here's where we are. We're going to jump down to the data. How are the churches doing since 2019? He said, we choose to look at 3 key data points for these churches: worship attendance, small group attendance, and baptisms. The latter category, baptisms, go by other names depending on the group: conversions, professions of faith, and others. Worship attendance represents every person attending, including children. The worship averages should be non-duplicating, meaning it only counts each person one time. Small groups go by a variety of names like Sunday school, community groups, home groups, life groups, cell groups, and of course, small groups. So here's where the data is. In-person worship attendance, 2019, little over 5 million, about 5 million and a quarter. 2020, 3,804,000 and some change. So that's a numerical decline in attendance of almost 1.5 million, almost 28% drop. And that's, now we're back to, people are kind of settled back into church. I think these numbers are going to be pretty consistent. I think this is our new baseline. So we effectively have lost just under 30% of church attendance since right before the pandemic hit. In-person small groups, right about the same, 27.86%. Baptisms, right in line, just under 24%. And of course, if you don't have people coming, it's hard to get conversions because a lot of times that's kind of the onboard for meeting people, getting introduced to people, and then having studies with them, and then ultimately baptizing them. So this is kind of interesting to me. And then he concludes it by saying, how is your church doing since 2019? I would encourage you to do a similar exercise for your church. Use 2019 as a base and compare it to either 2022 numbers or your current numbers in 2023. So question is, where do you think we measure up? Kind of hard to tell. You might have a little better sense because I think you record the numbers, but unless, unless you actually look and study it.
But I guess that's about right.
And in all fairness, with us, we lost quite a few to death. I mean, a significant percentage we lost to death since the pandemic. So, you know, that's, and then, of course, chronic illness. We have, just in the last 3 weeks, we have Christina long-term in the hospital. We have Sarah with congestive heart failure. That's the beginning, not really beginning. I guess that's like mid-stage of what's going to be pretty consistent decline in health and pretty rapid decline. So, looking at numbers, excluding people who've left the church, we've had a huge hit due to illness and death. So the question is, what do we do with this? Because we're not alone. We're certainly not alone. As you can see, like even the bigger churches, even the quote-unquote healthier churches, everybody is experiencing decline. And so how do we kind of match that with what we said about how the grit and just getting into the lives of people is going to win the day? That's how the church is going to continue, and that's how the church is going to grow. So how do we kind of mesh those two realities in a practical way? And it's not a rhetorical question. I'm actually asking for feedback. How do we mesh those things? Yeah. I mean, if we look at the rate of decline, the doctor's coming into the office. We ain't got much time, right? I mean, that's the reality. And so facing these two realities, it's the grit that wins the day and getting into the lives of people. I don't think that that's all bad news. And I don't know, like, I'm not a fortune teller. I'm certainly not a prophet. But in the future, I don't think that we should just throw our arms up and be like, okay, we're toast, we're done. I don't think that's the answer at all. I think, congregations begin with a remnant, and they also continue, or they revitalize with a remnant, with a small group. And so as long as we have people who are faithful to God and to Jesus Christ, I think the wrong answer is just to throw in the towel and be like, okay, we're absolutely doomed. I think a lot of churches are doing that, and so these house churches are kind of cropping up in record numbers out of necessity. So the church will go on. The church will always continue, I mean, till the end of time. That's just a fact. So I want to look at some scriptures. Go ahead, yeah. Let's look at the slide first. Yeah. We have scriptures posted all over the place. We love the Bible so much, we put it in multiple locations. So this is Isaiah talking about the remnant. Isaiah chapter 10, verses 20 through 23. And this idea of the remnant, this talk of the remnant is repeated throughout the Bible, I mean, really often, really consistent. So here Isaiah says, in that day, he's talking about when the Assyrians come in and they take over the north, and then ultimately when the south falls as well, down in Judah, he says, in that day the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob will no more lean on him who struck them, but will lean on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel in truth. A remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. For though your people Israel be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will return. Destruction is decreed, overflowing with righteousness. For the Lord God of hosts will make a full end, as decreed, in the midst of all the earth. Okay, so this is Assyrians coming into the north, and then many years later, Babylon coming into the south and taking over Jerusalem and destroying the temple. So I guess the question is, did it happen? Well, we know both biblically and historically, the archaeology shows us it absolutely happened. One of my favorite archaeological finds is the pick marks where King Hezekiah had people pick through the rock because he knew Jerusalem was going to be surrounded and they were going to be shut in. And so he wanted to bring water in secretly through these passageways. And so it was something like 150 feet below the ground level. These guys started picking at both ends, and it's absolutely incredible. Did you guys see that when you were there? Yeah, so Hezekiah's tunnel, phenomenal, isn't it? I mean, absolutely miraculously breathtaking, because somehow these rock pickers picked, and you can see the pick marks going in both directions, and it goes, it like snakes its way through, and there are several places where they picked and realized, wait, we're kind of off a little bit, and so they would straighten out and they would start, going in another direction, and they met pick to pick, side to side and top to bottom, exactly in the middle. To me, it's so incredible and miraculous. And so we have evidence. We know that there was this major destruction. We know for a fact that the majority of the Israelites turned away from God multiple times, and then there was always a remnant that God worked with. And he used that remnant to do incredible things and just to reach so many people. Another more modern example in the Bible is look at what Jesus did with 12 apostles. 12. And look at what they did. Look at what they accomplished. 12 is not a big group of people. I mean, you want to talk about a remnant? And it's interesting what Jesus told them, right? When he sends them out, what were they supposed to bring with them? Nothing. So it's not like he dumped all these resources on them and was like, all right, you have, this is your budget for going out. Time-wise, we're looking at this schedule. We're gonna hit these towns first, and then these towns, and this is, these are your goals. They didn't have any of that. They had faith, the clothes on their back, and the food that was in their bellies, and they went out and absolutely changed the world. And again, one of my other favorite archaeological finds that we have is the Pliny-Trajan letter, circa 110 AD, when Governor Pliny is writing Emperor Trajan, and he's writing to Rome, and he's like, these Christians are everywhere to the point that our temples have been deserted. What do we do with them? And he's talking about his torture techniques to get them to recant their Christianity. And the emperor writes back and he said, what you're doing is good. Keep doing it. That's fascinating to me because it shows very clear evidence outside of the Bible that the Christians multiplied in multitudes. They were everywhere, all throughout the Roman Empire. And so how did that start? It started with 12 men and a group of Galilean women who didn't have resources. They just went out and they were faithful to the word. It was grit, right? Isn't that what the Great Commission is in Matthew 28? It's not complicated, right? Jesus doesn't give this big, long, all right, I'm going to ascend and, man, get the encyclopedia ready because, man, have I got a lot to tell you. He didn't do that. He used one short paragraph. And what did he tell them to do? Yeah. Go into all the world, make disciples, make followers, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them all I commanded. That's it. A very interesting order. And you guys have probably been here long enough to know my soapbox, that I've always been frustrated when we flip those and we want to baptize people before we do any discipling whatsoever. And we're like, all right, we want to give them a Bible knowledge. We want to make sure that they know why they're being baptized, and which I'm not against. I think you certainly need to be informed, for sure. But to say, like, you can have no part of serving in any capacity until you've been immersed, and then we'll maybe consider. I always thought that was an interesting model because we completely flip that around. And we wonder why we have a discipleship problem within our movement. And it's not just us. I mean, so many denominations are plagued by this. We don't disciple people well. We don't make followers. And so it's the 80-20 rule. 20% of your people end up doing 80% of the work. Well, why is that? Are people lazy? I don't think that's the issue. I don't think people are lazy. Generally speaking, people are not lazy. I think we just haven't done well at making disciples, at delegating, and trusting God. Trusting God with small numbers and with small budgets. And we've done a really poor job, I think, of taking a remnant and saying, all right, let's see where God takes this. I think we've done a really anemic job of making disciples. Okay, so the longer passage here, Dave. This is in Ezra chapter 4, which I think is really interesting because this is, after Isaiah prophesied this, there was a remnant that came back into Jerusalem. And what they found was that, after they had been dispersed, they come back into Jerusalem and everything is just in shambles. The wall was down, the temple was down, everything's just, there are rocks everywhere where people just came in and obliterated the city. There's a very small group. Ezra leads them back into the city, and I'm just going to read a lot of this chapter, if not all of it. Now, when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do, and we've been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel said to them, "You have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God. We alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us." Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. In the days of Artaxerxes, Bishlam and Mithridath and Tabeal, these Hebrew names, they're fun, and the rest of their associates wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia. The letter was written in Aramaic and translated. Rehum the commander and Shimshai the scribe, who wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes the king, as follows. Rehum the commander, Shimshai the scribe, and the rest of their associates, the judges, the governors, the officials, the Persians, the men of the Babylonians, the men of Susa, that is, Elamites, and the rest of the nations whom the great and noble Osnappar deported and settled in the cities of Samaria and in the rest of the province beyond the river. This is a lot of people. This letter goes far and wide. This is not a local letter for the city of Jerusalem. This is a copy of the letter that they sent. To Artaxerxes the king, your servants, the men of province beyond the river, send greeting. And now be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem. They are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now be it known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and the royal revenue will be impaired. Now because we eat the salt of the palace, and it is not fitting for us to witness the king's dishonor, therefore we send and inform the king in order that search may be made in the book of the records of your fathers. You will find in the book of the records and learn that this city is a rebellious city, hurtful to kings and provinces, and that sedition was stirred up in it from of old. That was why the city was laid waste. We make known to the king that if the city is rebuilt and its walls finished, you will then have no possession in the province beyond the river. The king sent an answer to Rehum the commander and Shimshai the scribe and the rest of their associates who live in Samaria and in the rest of the province beyond the river, greeting. And now the letter that you sent to us has been plainly read before me. And I made a decree, and search has been made, and it had been found that the city from of old has risen against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made in it. And mighty kings have been over Jerusalem, who ruled over the province beyond the river, to whom tribute, custom, and toll were paid. Therefore, make a decree that these men be made to cease, and that this city be not rebuilt until a decree is made by me. And take care not to be slack in this matter. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the king? Then the copy of this letter was read. They went in haste to the Jews at Jerusalem, and by force and power made them cease. Then the work on the house of God that is in Jerusalem stopped, and it ceased until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So, just to give you an idea, and the reason I'm giving this background is because not only do you have a remnant, but you have a remnant who's pushing a boulder uphill as people are stomping on top of it and watching that boulder roll back down to the bottom of the hill that you just pushed halfway up, or not even halfway. And it got even more frustrating. Remember, when Nehemiah comes into the picture, they're working with one hand and they're standing guard with the other. They have a weapon in the other, a sword in the other, and so there's this not only frustration that's building, there's an imminent threat to their very own person. There's a threat of rebellion and violence, and these weren't perceived threats, these were real threats. And so I think it's interesting that we give up so easily today. That Christians give up so easily, and they're like, oh, well, this must be God's will. Like when things don't work exactly the way that they think it ought to work, they're like, oh, well, this must be God's will, and so, I guess we'll hop down to the, next church down the street where we can get our cups filled and be built up, and so it's rinse and repeat. And I just don't see God working that way. I see God who is faithful, who constantly takes a remnant and does these huge things with that remnant. Look at Gideon, right? This battle that was won with this tiny group of people. Over and over and over, you have these examples where it was this small group of people who changed the entire world through the power of God and through their faith. So I think we shouldn't be discouraged by the numbers. I know it's easy to get discouraged. Again, we're feeling it like everybody else is. But I think it's the wrong time to give up and get discouraged and be like, well, the church is doomed, and so let's throw in the towel. Or let's find a bigger church and, come be part of that. I don't really think that's the answer, because the bigger churches are being affected exactly the same as the smaller churches. This is across the board. So I'm always encouraged at looking at some of these trends, and especially what we talked about the last few weeks, that the trends are shifting in this direction where people are, they're willing to roll up their sleeves and they're willing to work for the kingdom. I'm tremendously encouraged by that. I think the 80-20 rule is going to start to roll in the opposite direction, where you have 80% of the people doing 20% of the work. No, that's not the way I mean rolling, but where you have 80% of the people doing 80 to 100% of the work. I think we're going to see that start to shift, if we're not already, where more and more people are getting involved in the lives of other people. And I'm not talking about volunteerism to keep people busy. I'm talking about real life getting into the lives of people. I'll leave you with this. When we were up there in Christina's room on Thursday, once again, I was tremendously encouraged by this congregation. We brought the cards that we made we had kids make cards on Wednesday. And so we delivered those, but before we put those cards up on her windowsill, which is huge, her windowsill was already covered from wall to wall with cards. Her phone, it was the same as when we were there. Her phone rings non-stop with people calling to check on her. I think that's really neat. That people they're reaching out. I checked her mail the other day, and I know Zelda's on the live stream now. There was a card from Zelda. in her mail. And just over and over and over, we see this example where people roll up their sleeves and they just step in. And it's not the responsibility of, one or two people and people sitting back and like, oh, well, the preacher will take care of all this. We're seeing people very actively, in large numbers, step up to the plate and just, not just with the cards and the visitations and things like that, but all the day-to-day stuff that needs done. And so I think we should be encouraged by that and know that even if you don't see all this stuff going on, it's happening. This stuff is very actively getting done at the hands of people here. So I think we should be encouraged by that, and I think God definitely has big things in store, and I think the church will continue to grind on, not just the local congregation, but at large. The church will keep reaching people. There's ample opportunity to reach people with the gospel. All right, we're up against the clock here, so we'll stop here and see you guys in a few minutes.